Attila the Hun. They call him the Scourge of God. He laid waste to everything in his path.
He was a thug, he was an extortionist, he was a murderer.
The stories are horrific, but they come from people with an axe to grind, his enemies. Can we reveal any truth behind the tales, largely by the Romans? Searching for the real Attila, events in his life will be scientific tests. Archaeological evidence will reveal how just looking at the Huns really did scare their enemies. And a psychiatrist will put him on the couch to try and understand Attila the man, and how he ranks alongside other ancients behaving badly. Attila was a marauding barbarian with a reputation as one of history's most violent rulers. His name, Attila, is still a synonym for savagery. Psychiatrist David Mallet will analyze the record's behavior.
Is Attila the Hun an empire builder, or is he a criminal and a thug?
Experts will attempt to rank Attila alongside other infamous figures from history, like Genghis Khan and Caligula. He has a terrifying record. The very mention of his name has generations. In the French city of Reims, he stormed into the church and beheaded the archbishop.
He sets out to become this terrifying, barbaric figure, and he achieves it.
He wiped out a whole culture, man, woman, and child, for gold.
Attila is a mass murderer, a pillager, a plunderer, terrorizing, savage.
He slaughtered an entire Roman army.
The man is utterly, utterly ruthless.
And he executed his deserters in a most bloodthirsty way.
For Attila, loyalty is everything. And betrayal, well, he's going to punish that with such brutality you'd wish you'd never been born.
The horror stories go on and on, depicting a level of barbarity that's hard to understand. Perhaps it's because they're written by the Romans, sworn enemies.
It's very hard to get an accurate image of the Huns because the evidence is so one-sided. The Romans are entirely prejudiced against the Huns. This is what the Roman writer Marcellinus had to say about them. They are totally ignorant of the distinction between right and wrong. A wild race consumed to pillage, rob, and slaughter.
Even the Roman histories, if they're to be trusted, are not complete. The record of his childhood is sketchy. Priscus, writing during Attila's lifetime, he was born somewhere on the Hungarian plain around 406 AD. He's the younger of two brothers and a member of the Hun royal family.
The world that he grew up in was one of grasslands, of tents, of horses, of wagons, of horse archery.
But the nature of Hun culture left little behind for the archaeologists. No permanent structures, no coins, no monuments.
Understanding Attila, who he is very, very difficult because of a lack of resources, a lack of it. It's like trying to grasp smoke.
Roman historians describe the Huns, but the culture was so different, they're nothing but scathing.
The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus describes the Huns in some detail. He says they have thick, squat, broken, bent bodies. They're prodigiously ugly. They have a savage passion to pillage. And from birth, the parents do the faces of their children. So
what do we really know about Attila and the Huns? Some hard evidence from rare archaeological sites has produced startling results. At Győr in Hungary, one excavation turned up Hun skulls from the time of Attila. What they found was strange deformity.
It was a widespread custom among the Huns that they deformed the skull of their children. They put the bandage on the forehead of the baby and wound around the head. And the bandage was knotted very tightly, and that's why the skull deformed.
So Marcellinus had described them correctly. For the Romans, Hun ethnic origin added to their strange appearance.
The large population of the Huns was in fact Asian. This, combined with this evidence we have for the deformed skulls, gives further weight to the description of them being terrifying, being different, being savage.
434 AD. Aged 28, Attila became leader of the Huns alongside his older brother, Bleda. They took control of lands stretching from Germany to Central Asia and from the Danube to the... In addition to their lands, the brothers wanted gold, and lots of it. The best source was close at hand, just across the Danube.
On this side, you have the Roman Empire, civilization, everything that it stands for. And on this side, you have the barbarians, the Hun, and they're so close that they can smell the loot.
In no time, the barbarians were at the gates. Attila, Bleda, and their men sacked one Roman town after another, striking quickly and vanishing. Sources say it was their horsemanship that gave the Huns the edge over the Romans.
These guys are glued to the saddle. These guys are with lightning speed. And on the saddle, they are a force to be reckoned with, using their arrows as they attack and as they retreat.
The difference in the Hun riders and the Romans was in the shape of their saddles. Unlike the Romans, the Hun saddles had a high front and rear section.
The advantages for this saddle is simply because it gives you support to the front and it gives you very good support to the back.
This allowed the rider to twist his upper body and shoot in any direction.
You're actually almost fixed in the saddle. That's the main difference.
With the rider locked in place, his horse becomes much more useful in battle, freeing the soldier to fight.
This is a very particular saddle that allows them to fire from 360 degrees. This is something that allows them to become extremely versatile and better than their opponents. And it really does transform a pack horse animal into a sophisticated fighting machine.
Attila became a 5th century marauder, storming Roman towns, looting and killing, and leaving them in flames. His reputation spread far and wide. This was a force to be reckoned with. But instead of fighting Attila and his hordes, the Romans decided to engage them, mercenaries. Clearly a case of keeping your friends close and your enemies closer.
The Romans recognized the military prowess of the Huns, and they promised them great riches if they come and fight for them.
It was an offer Attila and his brother Bleda couldn't refuse.
In 37 AD, the Huns launch a full-scale attack against the Burgundians in modern-day France.
Turned into an atrocity. Historical sources say Attila slaughtered the defenders, then turned on the women and children. 20,000 died. Slaughter of a race on an epic scale. But was there a strategy to this bloodlust?
The slaughter of the Burgundians by Attila reinforces in my mind the view that he's working for money. There's no greater goal. It's destruction for destruction's sake out of pure spite and hatred.
The Romans rewarded Attila generously for wiping out the Burgundians. Attila took the Roman gold and realized there was more, much more, where that came from.
Once they succeed getting one great payoff from the Romans, they know that they can come back for more. And again, and again.
But sacking and slaughtering far-flung tribes was enough for Attila. He wanted riches, and the center of wealth at the time was the Roman Empire. Rome hired Attila the Hun and his brother Bleda to do its dirty work, giving them gold for ridding the empire of its enemies. But Attila and Bleda wanted more, to ensure the loyalty of their Hun fighters. They set out to do something the barbarians hadn't done before: break into a fortified Roman city.
Attila basically wants to extort money from the Roman Empire. In order to do that, he's got to prove to the Roman Empire that he's going to be a problem if they don't give him that money. So he better find a city and destroy it.
A city like Nisus in modern-day Serbia. In 441 AD, the armed fortress of Nisus was strategically important to the Romans. But there was gold inside. Attila wanted only to pillage. He was not an empire builder.
Attila's not interested in cities. He just wants to break down the gate, get in there and trash the city, then get out as fast as he can. And the more people that get killed in the process, the better it is for his reputation.
Attila and his brother sent in their horsemen. They were down by the defending Romans. They turned to Plan B. According to Priscus, Roman diplomat of the time, it was simplicity itself: a tree. Priscus recorded that the walls of Nisus were destroyed by a battering ram. But what kind of battering ram would Attila and Bleda, illiterate nomads, have built to smash the city wall? This is a job for the SWAT team. The Emergency Response Unit of Canada's Ontario Provincial Police will put Attila's battering ram to the test. First, they need a ram built to the same spec as the one Attila used. Priscus describes a metal cap connected to the tree trunk, which is supported by a covered frame.
So it would be covered with probably willow, basketry, and it's because one of the most important things you need to do when you're trying to knock someone's wall down is stop them dropping rocks on your head.
They'll try to smash their way to a factory with steel doors and cinder block walls.
Here we have what would be quite a good representation of a Roman city gate. It would be a large gate just like this with a simple bifold. On the other side would be a crossbar to protect it and to stop people entering.
You ready? Okay. Cool.
But when attacking a city, the gate is often the most difficult way in.
People expect you to try and get through a gate. It was the strongest part of the fortification. So if you can go and knock down a wall, just take down a whole stretch of it, then it basically completely makes the place indefensible.
The ram easily broke through these blocks. But what about Roman defenses 5 times as thick?
Well, I think that shows pretty effectively. I'm pretty confident this would actually get through a Roman city wall, metre-thick wall. This went straight through this block wall without hesitation. And if we were up against a Roman wall, even with this, we'd be able to get through it.
Attila and Bleda, it seems, could have taken Nisus by smashing through the walls. Once inside, the Huns caused appalling carnage. The Roman Empire was in shock. For the first time, a fortified city had fallen. Word spread like wildfire. Attila was unlike any barbarian Rome had seen before. Imperial cities were there for the taking.
You can imagine the Romans quaking in their boots as they hear reports of breaking into cities and burning houses like this to the ground. And of course, that's precisely what Attila wants. I mean, like any terrorist, he thrives on fear.
Attila and his brother's reign of terror was just beginning. They began to increase the stakes. Go the richest city in the world. Constantinople, capital of the Eastern Roman Empire.
Here we are on top of old Constantinople, the jewel of the East, a prize waiting to be taken. You can imagine Constantinople as the Fort Knox of the ancient world. It had to be broken apart by Attila somehow or other if he was going to get what he wanted from it, which was loot and more loot.
Taking Nisus was impressive, but Constantinople, the imperial city with a population of over 500,000, was heavily fortified.
These are the walls of Constantinople. Time has happily x-rayed them for us. They are phenomenally thick. I would think 4 or 5 yards thick.
Beyond the walls, there were other defences.
Now look at this from the attacker's point of view. First of all, the field, which were then a moat, and then the first defensive wall, and then a platform where troops would have been massed, and then finally the main defensive wall itself. These were the most formidable defences of the ancient world.
But Attila had a further weapon, one far more powerful than his battering ram: psychological warfare. His terrifying reputation reached Constantinople long before he did. Attila could take impregnable cities, and once in, everyone died. The Romans crumpled. Instead of trusting in their defences, they threw gold at Attila to make him go away.
One of the bribes we know was 6,000 pounds of gold. That's 3 tons of gold, which comes out to about $100 million in modern terms. More wealth than Attila had ever seen in his life.
But even 6,000 pounds of gold wasn't enough for Attila. He wanted revenge. He had some to settle with deserters from his army, who were now inside Constantinople. The Romans handed them over to a terrible fate.
Attila is ruthless. And when there are deserters of his army that go over to the other side, he wants them back, he demands them back, and he gets them back. And he doesn't welcome them with open arms. He has them impaled. He has them run through, and they're hung up to death for a period of 2 days. That is Attila the Hun.
It's the punishment for disloyalty. What kind of man would do this?
The method that Attila uses to kill his enemies demonstrates a particularly brutal and sadistic cruelty.
If even Constantinople couldn't stand up to Attila, and nowhere was safe. Attila was leading an ancient protection racket, and doing it on a vast scale.
Attila is a brilliant tactician. He comes to the walls of Constantinople, he threatens, he gets his bribe, he goes away, he can come back. So he's like that mafia boss that keeps on coming, keeps on extorting, and in the end, he's a part of your life, he's a part of your culture, and you can't get rid of him.
Now only one stood between Attila and total power. His brother in arms and blood, Bleda. Attila the Hun and his brother Bleda had generated one of the most fearsome reputations in history. One which enabled them to extort gold from the Romans. It had worked like a charm for 12 years, until brotherly love turned into sibling rivalry. One day in 445, Bleda went hunting and never came back. Jordanes, a Roman writer, called it murder and pointed the finger at Attila.
Attila and his brother have grown up together. They've done everything together. They've ruled together. Attila callously murders him. This shows Attila as a psychopathic killer.
Attila was now sole leader of the Huns. He'd grown rich on extorted Roman gold that he used to keep his men loyal. But the Romans had finally half. They assembled an army to engage Attila on the battlefield at Utus in modern-day Bulgaria. The Romans were slaughtered on a huge scale. The survivors had their excuses.
The Romans had to justify their loss to these barbarians. And how do they do it? Well, it's not because they're sophisticated and great and intelligent, it's because they were numerically far superior. Oceans of armies overrunning the small Roman army.
Roman sources put Attila's army at 500,000, and their own at only 120,000, outnumbered 4-1 by the barbarian. For the Romans, a face-saving explanation. But was it true? Using the science of animal husbandry, it's now possible to work out the real size of Attila's army. It can be calculated through the number of horses. The Huns' grazing land was here on the Hungarian plain, a natural bowl bounded by the Alps, the Carpathian Mountains, and Danube.
Studies have shown that the Hungarian grasslands can support perhaps 150,000 horses.
That's already a lot less than the 500,000 Roman accounts suggest. Beyond that, each of Attila's men probably had several horses.
If Hun horsemen needed, say, 5 horses each, that's going to give a basic army of 30,000. This is quite a modest force to take on the Roman Empire. So if the Romans want to explain their defeat by referring to the overwhelming numbers of the Huns, they need a rather better excuse.
This analysis revealed the total opposite of what Roman accounts say. It's Attila who was outnumbered 4-1, not the Romans. So what happened? Clues can be found in the account from the Roman writer Marcellinus. His observations of the Huns before Attila was born suggests they had a very different approach to warfare. Firstly, they sent in archers to break up the Roman ranks. They also used 2 everyday tools that the Romans were not prepared for, the lasso and the net. Simple equipment used in a highly effective way.
There were probably specifically assigned people who would use this to coordinate an actual maneuver. So let's say you attack from one corner, one flank to the other flank, and they would use the rope and use that effectively in a choreographed maneuver.
And when faced with lasso-throwing horsemen, there was little the Roman infantry could do.
Last their neck, of course, in dragging them, they would be dead in seconds.
Rome had no answer to these tactics. Tens of thousands died. And there's another reason why the Romans were beaten. They were simply no longer a disciplined force that dominated the barbarians for centuries.
This is your classic Roman legionary as seen in countless Hollywood films. And basically he's wearing a suit of armour called lorica segmentata because of the segmented layers within it, a helmet and a large shield, large rectangular shield, which is designed for close order fighting. They lock their shields together and they raise their throwing javelins, their pilums, through the limbs at the enemy, then charged forward with their shields forward, drew their short swords and stabbed home.
These were the soldiers that the world. But by Attila's time, soldiers like this were ancient history.
By the time of Attila, a Roman legionary is looking much, much more like this. Very different to that guy over there. I mean, essentially, he's now got barbarian-style trousers, and his helmet is also sort of based on a sort of barbarian Persian design.
What's more, the sources say the Roman army would have largely been made up of mercenaries. Barbarians. They had none of the training or equipment the Roman army had used to conquer the world. Crushed the defeat, the Romans at Constantinople sued for peace. An envoy headed to his base in Hungary to talk terms. Travelling with him was the writer Priscus, who scribed history's only first-hand account of Attila. Historian John Mann retraces the journey.
Setting out from Constantinople northwards, it takes them a month or so.
And every day, Priscus found grisly evidence of Attila's savagery.
Along the way, they come to areas which have been devastated by the Huns on their way south. One of them being the town of Nisus, which is shattered. There are skulls still lying about, bones on the riverbank.
Eventually, they left the Roman Empire and crossed into Attila's territory, reaching the Tisa River.
They must have been scared out of their wits by what was ahead of them. This was like coming to see Saddam Hussein, but without any warning. Attila was random in his violence.
It's not known exactly where Priscus met Attila, but John Mann believes it was close to this spot.
Well, I think this is what we've been looking for. This is the sort of that Priscus would finally have met Attila. And the account he left of him was a very surprising one.
Priscus expected to find a whole tent city of unwashed barbarians. What he encountered surprised him. Not just wooden huts, but a stone-built bath complex along the lines of this one.
Priscus sees that there is a bath complex within the headquarters of Attila. And this is shocking because this is a great characteristic of Roman culture, not the culture of the Huns. So the fact that it's present there within the shadow of Attila is a great indication that the Huns can adapt and adopt great Roman ideas. And the bath is one of the key characteristics of a Roman city.
This account of Attila paints a very different picture to the raping and pillaging barbarian of popular belief. He's also depicted as a man attached to his family.
Priscus' portrait of Attila is one of a very rounded individual. He's an affectionate father. Priscus sees that. He is a modest person. So you do see that human side of this very stoic ruler.
But how does this work alongside Priscus's descriptions of Attila as a heavy-drinking, quick-tempered thug who doesn't think twice about impaling traitors and slaves? Who is the real Attila?
Inside, Attila can act superficially like an upper-class Roman. However, outside, as people are being impaled, we see his true colors. He is a psychopathic killer.
2 years after Priscus's visit, Attila had drained Constantinople. By this time, the Roman Empire had split in two. Having exhausted the eastern half of the Roman Empire, he turned his attention west. At 45, Attila was back in the south, eager once again to make the Romans pay. It had always worked before, But this time he'd badly underestimated the empire. Attila the Hun and his barbarian hordes were once more on the rampage, pushing at the Roman Empire. They came galloping out of the Hungarian plain into the heart of Europe.
Everyone's surprised Attila now heads north from his homeland, goes north and crosses the Rhine, making one of the most clear smash and grab raids ever in the history. And he's in Central Europe.
Attila covered hundreds of miles with thousands of men on back, all of them fiery and spoiling for a fight. It's as if they've been fed raw meat. It turns out that they had. The Roman historian Marcellinus recorded uncooked flesh warmed on horses' backs. But raw meat is hard to digest, even for a barbarian. Surely, this is another case of the Romans demonizing the Huns. Historian Robert Mason wants to find out.
We have this specially prepared saddle blanket so that we have as little horse hair as possible.
The horse is ridden for 6 hours to discover if the meat becomes edible or just revolting.
So we'll have another slice of this. Something has been done to it. It has been imparted with a certain tenderness. It's not raw anymore.
The story seems to be true. Nutritionist Lynn Weaver thinks she knows why.
There is the assumption that the salt on the horse, and salt is actually a preservative, so that is preserving the outside of the meat, which would keep the bacteria away. It was also covered, and then there was a lot of pressure given to it to tenderize it.
Raw meat is indigestible because of its tough cellular structure, but the pounding action of riding breaks down the cell walls, tenderizing it. Version of the raw meat dish steak tartare, a practical dish that gives Attila and his men more time in the saddle.
It's not bad.
Attila and his meat-fed forces stormed across Western Europe and came to the walled city of Metz. They rolled out the rams, and the city fell. He cut deeper into Europe, finding one ghost town after another. The terrified inhabitants had fled. But at Rheims, Archbishop Nicasius stood firm, singing hymns to ward off the barbarian. But Attila didn't care for hymns. He sliced off the archbishop's head. Was there grand strategy here, or was Attila just on a bloody rampage?
Attila's attack on the Western Empire of Rome has no apparent strategic value whatsoever. It's about spite, revenge, hatred, and destruction.
Finally, Attila reached the Catalonian plains in northern France and came face to face with the Roman armies of Western Europe. The Roman general Aetius had a simple strategy: strength in numbers. He'd scoured Gaul and pulled together every last tribe that had a grudge against Attila, from the remnants of the Burgundians to the Visigoths. Two very different armies faced each other.
The key to this battle was the high ground. On the Catalonian plain there was a ridge of ground in between the two armies, and both sides raced to get there first. And it was the Romans who got there first. And at that point they just dug a ridge and let Attila's cavalry just come at them up the hill. It's cavalry against infantry dug in a defensive position.
Both sides lost many men. Sidonius Apollinaris, a contemporary Gallic poet, suggests 100,000 died a single day. And the river across the plain flowed red with blood.
So you've got wave after wave of Huns coming up this ridge and getting thrown again and again and again. And then at the decisive moment, the Visigoths just charged down the hill. Attila's just thrown right back into his camp, and the unthinkable's happened. Attila's lost the battle.
Aetius won, forcing Attila to stand and fight, instead of allowing him to use guerrilla tactics. Attila turned out to be very bad at losing.
Attila loses his first major battle. This isn't going to be a deterrent. He believes in raw power. He's going to be furious. He wants vengeance. He's going to try to get even.
That's exactly what Attila did. He decided Rome was going to pay and set his sights on Italy. He crossed the Alps and launched a new wave of destruction. First, the fortified city of Aquileia. The siege machines did their job, but men poured into the city and destroyed it. Attila had the advantage, his fearsome temptation. Entire populations fled from his path. But then Attila faltered. The story is that the Pope stepped in and persuaded him to turn back. But the real story might have more to do with the diseases ravaging Europe.
There were many reasons to turn back, famine perhaps, but almost certainly plague, so that in the end it was not battalions that conquered him, but bacteria.
With plague decimating his army and winter closing in, Attila took a wise and turned for home. By Attila's standards, this hadn't been the most successful European rampage, but still, he returned with gold. He was around 47 years old and had survived 19 years of bloody war. It was a battle that would kill him, but his excesses in life that would finally defeat him. By 453 AD, he was worn out and ready for a break from fighting. A break that was all too short.
He takes on a new bride, and she's beautiful as these stories go. She's wonderful, she's young, takes her into his bedroom. The next morning, dead. According to Priscus, when Attila's body is found, he's had a nosebleed. Now, can such a warrior have died such an ignoble death?
The scourge of God dead from a nosebleed. What could have happened? Priscus provides some medical evidence in his account of Attila's death.
Attila was found in a stuporous state with a lot of blood around the mouth. There's blood, in fact, in close proximity as well, but there's no evidence of vomitus.
Knowing this, a medical expert can establish a probables of death.
This brings up the possibilities that the blood either came in from the lungs or the gastrointestinal tract.
Tuberculosis, infection, or a tumor could all cause bleeding from the lungs, but only small amounts of frothy blood. This doesn't match Priscus's description. Attila had been a heavy drinker all his life and was possibly suffering from liver damage.
One of the consequences of this is that the blood vessels that feed into the liver end up expanding and filling up even more.
Vessels in the throat lead into one of the main veins running to.
When too much pressure builds up into these vessels, they can actually burst or rupture, leading in a massive hemorrhage.
These were the probable consequences of his lifestyle. A run of too much drinking, too much carousing, and too much stress. His night of anticipated bliss probably ended in a coughing fit, a sudden hemorrhage, and a rush of blood.
The patient actually ends up choking in their own blood. So in Attila's case, it's probably a combination of both the shock state from the massive bleeding or hemorrhage, as well as filling enough the blood into the trachea and him suffocating in his own blood that resulted in his death.
A bloody death for a bloody killer. Attila grew up a nomad on the plains of Hungary to challenge the might of the Roman Empire. The count ran to hundreds of thousands. He waged wars of terror and extortion. he all but wiped out the Burgundians in a ferocious ode of killing. He destroyed city after city just because he could. Rotting bodies filled the streets. His revenge for treachery was horrific, impaling, a slow and painful death. So where does this behavior place Attila on the scale of ancients behaving badly? Was Attila a psychopathic murderer who killed for the sheer love of it, like Caligula? Or was he driven to murder as per vision, like Genghis Khan?
His violence, his conquering, doesn't seem directed to any specific end. He wants to go out and destroy almost for destruction's sake itself. He's a cruel, remorseless killer. Attila is top of a scale of psychopathic behavior.
All Attila cared about was destruction. He had no vision that ensured a future for the Huns.
Compared to the other ancient tyrants, Attila is very low on a scale of creativity. He doesn't solve problems. He doesn't build anything. He doesn't leave anything behind. When in doubt, kill.
It's a nasty psychological profile.
Attila reminds me of a drug lord, a Pablo Escobar. They're interested only in naked power, money. They create nothing. They build nothing. If anyone gets in your way, kill them.
Attila may have succeeded in building enormous wealth from 5th century extortion, but his lack of vision resulted in his failing to lay the foundations of an enduring civilization. When he died, the Han Empire fell. Just 30 years later, nothing remained except the reputation of Attila the Hun.